one, but you have to use it. Of course, it's the cheapest. Okay.
Yes, Madam Chair, we do. We have two. Shall I call them?
Please,
First speaker, Neil Skeen.
Mr. Skeen, Attorney Skeen.
Good afternoon. I seem to never miss a chance to talk with you. My purpose is to try to be helpful. I don't want to complicate your lives further, particularly with this complicated document, and try to just provide a couple of things that might sort of be a way of filtering all of that's coming at you. In the message that I sent to you all yesterday, I believe, I mentioned the comment from Gunther Gable Williams of Ringling Brothers that you train horses by finding out what they like to do and teaching them to do it. It's building on a strength. And one thing in a needs analysis sort of looks for weaknesses, but doesn't really identify what things you are going to use, what strengths you're going to use to build back a system to address those weaknesses. If you remember the movie Apollo 13, at one point, Gene Kranz, the character played by Ed Harris, says, "What do we have on the spacecraft that's working?" Because that's the only way they're going to deal with all the things that are not working. So, and the same way with a child and family. I mean, if you're looking at a child and a family and are focused on what's wrong with the child, what's wrong with the family, which is the way government systems often intervene, you miss the strengths that you can build on to build them back. And so a strength-based system that builds a system for the family and a system for the community are really what I'm trying to encourage in those comments. The second piece of that, of course, is the importance of trauma and or adverse experiences in a child's life and a family's life, and the way they affect the brain. I won't try to do a neurological treatise here today, but the impact on the exaggerated fight or flight or freeze instinct, as opposed to the judgment in the frontal lobe, starts to change the way children react to stimulus, and also explains a lot of the ways we need to respond to them as a way of helping them settle down. So I hope this is a little helpful in thinking about sort of key components of what you look for. And the idea of this for the needs analysis ITN is to say, how do we find the vendor who, when we get to those negotiations that Walter has so soundly advised you to focus on for a lot of these details, when we get there, how can we ensure that we have the vendor who is best able to give us the things that we need to build our system? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And do we have another?
Yes, ma'am, we do. We have one more, Emily Fritz.
Am I supposed to give you my address?
Sure.
Oh.
That'll be in the policy that the council.
Well, okay, it's
addresses next
1433 Vieux Drive, 32308. I want to tell you, I think this document's very good. I was actually impressed, and I just have a couple of comments that I think might make it clearer, because clarity, the more clarity, the better. At the last meeting, and I believe at the last Needs Assessment Committee meeting, it would stress that you want to make private practice, well, non-profit companies have the option to participate. For instance, you might want to contract with Sylvan Learning Center or a private tutoring company for tutoring. I don't think that is clear in this document. And I say that because the service provider, instead of using the word service providers, the word agencies is used throughout the document. And when I hear the word agencies, I think government or nonprofit. And of course, we want government and nonprofit. I'm not putting them down, but it needs to be clear that other vendors can participate. For instance, on page 5, the middle of the page in number 3, the word agencies is used 5 times. And at the last, it says federal agencies, public assistance agencies, juvenile courts, foster care, and other applicable public and private agencies and organizations. To me, that doesn't let you know that a private company can bid. Perhaps say an applicable public, private companies or service providers. The term service providers is all encompassing because you want to get the providers that provide the best services, whether they're nonprofit, profit, whatever. So that's a suggestion. And on page 21, where you refer to the create an inventory of a comprehensive inventory of programs, providers, and services in Leon County. I think just for the sake of clarity, you should add a statement that says, this shall include federal, state, and local programs and nonprofits. That way they know that they need to look at the government programs as well, state and federal. And I also think you should suggest that when they collect this, that they include the funding levels of each program, because this doesn't refer to the funding. And that's an important piece of data that you need to know. At the bottom of page 21, it refers to the fact that the vendor should determine the amount of federal funds received through the American Rescue Plan, which obviously is good, that you need that. But there's also another proposal in Congress now, the American Families Plan. You may have heard President Biden refer to it as human infrastructure. And this plan will offer a lot of childcare, preschool, and junior college and vocational training. That, I don't know whether it will pass. It's a proposal that's now, and they're fighting over it in Congress right now. But if it passes, you need that information as to be included. And it may pass in 2 months, it may pass in 6 months, I don't know. But if it's going to pass, it probably will pass before the vendor is completed. And that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you both very much for your comments. Is that all? Do we have time? Is
One
that
more,
all?
Madam Chair. Jack Levine.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of committee. So it is in our federal documents that all men, and we infer women, are created equal, but in reality, we know that all children are not. And the context of family and the context of community is essential for us to address the holistic needs that I believe this council and our authorizing statutes demand of us. I'm going to make a suggestion in writing, but I just want to presage that with 2 or 3 key points. The first is I'm asking you to zoom out. Holistically look, not so much at the individual needs of individual children or the individual dollars of individual programs, but to create some kind of a preface, something that signals the potential bidders that this is about a big picture look at our future together as a community. Now, as opposed to what happens in state agencies, and I have very good friends in state agencies, they have to attend to crisis. They have to attend to the must-dos that should have been or could have been done 10 or 15 years ago. But for whatever reason, the conglomerate of opportunities were not there. And so we have courts, so we have DCF agencies, so we have juvenile justice agencies. The purpose that I read into the statutes in my travels around for children's service councils is truly the preventative investment on what shouldn't happen and doesn't necessarily have to happen. So I would want our bidders to know that you're very, very serious about a holistic view of the family in the context of community, and the best kinds of services integrate rather than compete with each other. The next point I'd like to make is one that I think would echo and would resonate with each of you, is there are pieces of the ITN that talk about children, youth, and parents. But I'm going to repeat a comment I made in an earlier testimony. We are a multi-generational society. We are multi-generational in how we attend to our children, especially the growing number of children that are in fact under the direct jurisdiction, if not formally, then informally, of their grandparents, aunts, uncles, and other kinship relationships. We should not ignore the fact that that is a reality for a lot of our children, especially our risk children. So again, in my theme of broadening the audience of who we hope to touch with our eventual services, let's think about the mutual needs of the generations and the opportunities of bringing in the generations into our lives of children. And finally, for these few minutes, I'm very heartened to learn much in my travels and in my correspondence about models that already exist around the state with our sister and brother children's service councils. They are doing some phenomenal work with some phenomenal measures, and I think it would be very important for our potential bidders to do a very important analysis of our other preceding children's service councils. And for each of these ideas, I stand ready to help in any way I can. Do call on me and do ask whatever questions you have of the true meaning of these messages. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Levine.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any more comments? Okay, wonderful. Thank you so very much. Okay, so during our last council meeting, or the previous last council meeting, we wanted to be able to invite some individuals to be a part of this conversation who has had an opportunity to review this and to provide us some professional feedback. And I do think that we do have an invited guest to be here with us today. I would like to introduce Mr. Jim Croteau. I'm so sorry to mess that up, Mr. Croteau. Let me just give you a little bit of information about him. He is currently the director at the Envision Credit Union, president of the 21st Century Council. He's been that president since 2012. He served as the interim CEO of America's Second Harvest of the Big Bend, former head of the Elder Care Services. He's been a part of the Leon County School Board for 35 years in a wide range of different capacities. And he has contributed significantly to some of the feedback that we currently have in our version of the ITN. So with that, Mr. Croteau, I'm so sorry. We would like to give you an opportunity of 10 minutes, sir, to address the committee and just provide us with some overview thoughts and feedback and some of the things that you would like to see considered and things that you want to make sure that we are aware of as we revise or look at the ITN.
All right, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk. In general, the ITN is a very solid document. Technically speaking, it checks all the boxes that you as an agency would like as part of the negotiations. And I'm sure you looked at that level of detail from your experience. Well, but my input is a little more global on the substance of it and the process. We've had a couple of needs assessments for CHSP over the last few years that have not been successful because they've taken a very narrow view and looked just at gaps in services and perceived needs. And I think you all have the opportunity to have a comprehensive view that sets a model for not just identifying needs, but also that allows you to make some priority decisions and strategically plan based on data and information you have. Also have a framework for accountability right from the start. So as you make awards for grants, people know what's expected of them and what they're trying to impact. And then the ability to report to the community on an ongoing basis on the important priorities that you've established, but in outcome terms rather than just in process terms. Although process is important, the long-term effectiveness of this council is going to depend on whether there are results that can demonstrate to the community you're making a difference in the lives of children and their families. So good needs assessment upfront says, whatever you give me, it has to be a framework that allows me to look at gaps between our desired outcomes, the state that we would like to see us in, and the actual current situation that we have. So I can make, as a council, some decisions on what priorities we want to move forward with. An example would be used if you have established as your focus area success in schools. An outcome, desired outcome would be all children arrive at school prepared to learn. That's just one example. But you would expect across your focus areas that the consultant you hire give you those specific outcomes and then follow up with how that's going to be measured. So if kids arrive at school successful to learn, they may add as measured by the Leon County Schools kindergarten readiness assessment. Okay, so that's a point where you have to make some decisions, particularly as a committee, to be sure that the desired outcomes they've identified are ones you agree with, and then the measures are one that's acceptable and comprehensive enough so that you get some good data. And then obviously, when you do get the data, then that's a decision point in terms of what gaps between the current situation and your desired situation that you would like the consultants then to make the second step. And the second step in the process, and I suggest that they don't go past to the second step before they get to the complete the first step, is then collect the data and look at it with an analysis across demographics, across census tracts or school zones or whatever way they can disaggregate that data so that it's meaningful. So for example, the kids' success in school, if you want to look across the county, you're going to see there's a black-white discrepancy, there's a north-south school discrepancy, there's neighborhood discrepancies, and some schools that have similar demographics, seem to not have as big a discrepancy as other schools. Doesn't give you the answer, but it also gives you an area to look at for focus. And you can decide, well, we're not going to attack the problem here. We're going to look at the problem here. Once those data come in and you'll be able to look at particular needs of particular groups in particular parts of the community, then the next step for the consultants is say, okay, what's working across the state and across this country that seems to address those particular gaps? What are the best practices that are out there? Now, we generally do that in a needs assessment at the end, and I suggest that you do that up front, because before you do an inventory of current practices, you really know what to compare that inventory against. And having a list of best practices that target those gaps that you're looking for, that have some evidence or some research or some other indicator that they make a difference, then you have a board to compare current practices and current providers here in the county. So having best practices, you can see who's doing it right now. And there are some agencies, for example, quality childcare centers that have their kids are 95% successful on the kindergarten exam. There are also a number of providers where their kids aren't successful. What are those people doing? What kind of best practices are they using compared to what we know in the knowledge base? Also in that part of that service needs assessment, which I want to distinguish from the gap between desired and current outcomes, that's one needs assessment. There's a service needs assessment where you say, okay, we have best practices that are out here that are serving 500 kids, but we have identified 2,000 kids who have had this gap, who are not successful in school. That allows you to see where you want to expand the best practices or where you want to start new programs and encourage people to do new programs. Now, having the performance outcomes, like the measurements that allowed you to disaggregate and look at that data, also gives you a framework when you start allocating funds that you would expect from the consultants as part of the INT, recommendations where they've analyzed some of the data for you, so you don't have to do it all, and they can recommend, here are some best practices that need to be reinforced, here's some that are missing, here's services that need to be provided or expanded for you to consider, not necessarily saying they're going to be the ones who decide, but they're going to give you data and they're going to give you recommendations to consider. So that becomes another decision point for the council. Then obviously the grant process that you have would reinforce those practices, but now you have an accountability measure that you built into the grant contracts for the service providers. And it all comes back to the circle again. You want to see them move the needle from the current situation toward that desired end. And after a year, 2 years, or whatever, you're able to look at the providers and your priorities and see if you're making a difference on those selected indicators. So it becomes a system that I'm recommending that your consultant understands, but I also suggest that the council has to be involved, not just at the end, thank you for the report, but at this point, and at this point, to be sure they're on the track, you're getting the data that you need, and you're seeing the opportunities for funding and support that you think will make a difference before you get to the RFP and ask the agencies to tell you how they're going to address those best practices and those outcomes. I'm happy to answer any questions.
This is excellent. Thank you so very much. I'm the kind of person I have to say it back to make sure I completely understood what you're saying. But what I'm hearing is that you're telling us to create a management system as we work to develop this needs assessment. We start by asking the consultant, whoever's going to be doing this work, to set targets for us in the priority areas. So look at the priority areas. What are those target areas? And what are the measures that we should use, both outcomes and process measures, to be able to track performance in those priority areas? After they create that for us, then we ask them to identify the gaps. So what are the gaps in where we are based on the performance right now in those priority areas, and where is our performance in reaching those targets? So if the target is here, this is currently where our area is. Then they are to collect data and then identify what the needs are to fill those gaps. So what are the things that'll allow us to go from our current level of performance to our targets, and what are the services that are needed to be able to close those gaps? Then we are to look at what's working in other areas. What are the best practices that will help us reach those targets? And then we can determine what services are needed to be able to fill those gaps. Who are the programs that we need to be able to bring forward? Then we look at current programs, what programs are already there, what programs we need to be able to expand, and then we can determine how do we allocate our funds to be able to fill those gaps with additional services. That's what I heard. And it's a performance system that allows us to track performance over time. Am I even close to what it is that you're proposing that we do? Okay.
Exactly, you've got
Perfect.
it.
Okay.
And it sounds easy to talk about the framework.
Yeah.
But it puts a tremendous demand on the consultant to show you how they're going to address those things in a systematic way. And there's a lot of data out there, but there's some data that's going to have to be collected that isn't available on charts and it is available in the Alice report, that you're going to expect those folks to dig a little bit. And there's a lot of best practices out there, but it's going to take some research, and that's different than what most needs assessment people do. They want to tell you the gap and tell you to fix it. You want them to tell you how they think it could be fixed so that you could then go to the next phase and the next phase.
That also puts demand on us to manage it appropriately too. Absolutely. Judge.
So do you have a sense, how close does our document come to the process?
I've been working with Ted some and a couple of people from FSU, and we've gotten some input into the document. So
So in summary, you feel like we're on the right track?
yes, the document's comprehensive. It's good. You know, obviously you can argue over some words. I like service provider. Thank you, Emily. It's a great phrase. But the rubber is going to meet the road in the negotiation.
Yeah.
And it needs to be a hardball negotiation with the consultant.
Yeah.
Well, perhaps you'll be with us for the negotiation.
I've offered, and some other folks have offered to help with reviewing the responses and to giving feedback to the needs assessment committee on that.
We gladly accept. Yeah, absolutely. So thank you very much for sharing your outline for how you think we can appropriately manage this. It was very important for me to hear that. I saw elements of that, but just having you speak to that really solidifies that for me. And I think will really help us as we work to manage the work with the needs assessment.
Right.
Any other committee members, any other questions for Mr. Cruto?
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. God bless you. Thank you. Yes, sir.
I think you speak for all of us when you talk about your continued interest in his being involved. Mr. Cruto is a great gift to our community. His expertise is invaluable. And it goes back to part of what I have also discussed is that our education community is a fantastic resource in this work. So I'm glad to know that he'll be involved. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for those comments. Okay, well, with that, we're going to move on because we have a lot to cover today. I am going to ask Ted by starting by walking us through, especially the changes that were made since our last iteration of the ITN. Now, I'm going to ask Ted to go through the entire document just to make sure everybody gets eyes on everything first. He's going to go through the full thing. Then we're going to stop and go back segment by segment, especially in the areas where we think we need to have some conversations. So if you do have any questions based on what he says, just tag it, make a note, and then we'll come back to it. Okay?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to demask so I can read, not fog up. I would just like to extend my thanks also to Mr. Cruto, who has just been provided extraordinary counsel on this and has linked me in with some professionals who do this for a living and have just, it's been invaluable. And thank you. So to run through this, I'm going to do this very quickly. And just page by page. So on page 1, you'll see highlighted CSC Leon. We're going to be presenting a communications plan, hopefully at this August 19th meeting. Part of that plan will be how do we frame what the CSC is? How do we brand the CSC? At this point, what we're seeing is CSC Leon may be the easiest way to say it and easiest way for people to remember it. That'll be up for discussion next week or in 2 weeks. The second yellow on the first page in the original that we had, or the last one that you saw, we had that the proposal, the responses would be submitted to a PO box because that's the address that we had. Mr. Fred Springer, who is the attorney in our general counsel's office who reviewed this, suggested that that would not be the best way to do it because of mail issues, et cetera. So we will be using the general counsel's office for delivery of the hard copies of these. On the next page is a table of contents, and you probably don't remember because it was so jammed up, but Mr. Springer is a national resource in terms of procurement. He helped to write some of the procurement laws in the state of Florida. And when you look at this, there's a flow to it that was not in the draft that we did. And it just makes a lot more sense. It will make a lot more sense to potential vendors and those who respond much more clearly. He did add most of the negotiation section, which is the reason why it's there in yellow. And I'll talk about that not open to the public because it's highlighted a little bit later in the substantive area. On the third page, we changed the word funding recommendations to funding options. Recommendations has kind of an implicit sense to it that it's not an option. And really what they provide to you guys is going to be an options that you will select from, not necessarily recommendations. On page number 4, one of the things that Mr. Sox has done over the last few meetings is try to help us all understand the difference between what should be in an ITN, what should be in the negotiation process, and what really is should be under the purview of the council itself. We met with Mr. Sachs the other day, and he suggested that that number 6 there should be deleted and added. It really is under the purview of the council to determine its priorities, not a vendor. So that's why that is highlighted. Over the next few pages under yes, sir.
Before we move from that, are you saying we're going to take 6 out altogether?
Yes, sir. And then when you all have received and are determining your funding awards, that's when you will prioritize these things. That's what we were suggesting.
Maybe I'm missing something. And I think I remember this train of thought when we were meeting together. We talked about what we did not want them to provide undue influence. But because, and perhaps we can wordsmith it better. I'm not entirely opposed. Particularly, I think the word I may have used as we talk about prerequisite. There are some things that are building blocks and chains that work, that help us to build, that we can't do one thing without considering the other. And I'm hoping that we would be open to some type of expertise that comes from them having prepared this cumulative, exhaustive, comprehensive document, whereby that perhaps not its fundings, but certainly can give us some order or suggested order in terms of how we would move forward. I think funding might be the wrong thing, maybe funding decisions, but certainly I don't mind hearing their recommendations. I'm not entirely opposed to it because any recommendation, option, or whichever word we use, the final decision still lies with us. So that's the only thing that gives me, because I'd hate for them to, ultimately this is what we do, is provide funding options. And I don't know that I'm so opposed to them helping to point me in the right direction. I'm not saying it, I don't want to sound wordy, but I just think I'm not entirely opposed to that.
I do have a comment to that. I don't know how I feel asking them to help us prioritize funding, but I would like to ask them to help us prioritize where the biggest gaps are in achieving our targets for our priority areas. So if they say the biggest gaps are in these areas, then we look at that and then we can prioritize that without asking them, give us a priority list as to how we should spend the funding. Does that make sense?
Well, for example, and I think because we don't know entirely how much money we'll have at our disposal. We understand that. Right. We also don't know what our responses are going to be, right? But if they were saying that based upon their needs assessment, the greatest investment or priority investment should be in early learning compared to after having done the needs assessment compared to juvenile crime. Mm-hmm. I'm not entirely opposed to that. Yes.
They're going to be interpreting data.
They will.
To some extent. Whether it's a list of, this is your number one priority, this is your number one priority. This is the gap and this is the extent of the gap. The right. Services gap. We have identified these 27 gaps and we prioritize, and we interpret the data that this gap looks like this, the next gap looks like this, the next gap looks like this.
Right.
So they're going to interpret the data, and I kind of see that maybe subsumed under number 7. I can CSC Leon realize best value while achieving the ITM. And maybe that's not it. Ted, maybe you can respond a little bit. What do you think?
I'm sorry. I'm wondering if you're really talking instead of prioritizing funding of how the vendor might recommend kind of scaffolding implementation in a way that would help to maximize the effectiveness of the programs that the council might invest in. Does that?
I'll weigh in just a minute here, if you don't mind. the complexity of what we're going to be presented with is probably going to be vast. And I appreciate the comments about this, the consultant who does the needs assessment needs to have a very good understanding of what quality services and quality communities appear to be. And has done the research and said, if you hold up this model of early development, if you hold up this model of youth development, if you hold up this model of food stability, these are the highest quality models of that nationwide. They know what that looks like. Where does Leon County fit against that standard? So they have to, one, have the knowledge to know nationally what great looks like. Where do we fit against that? What are the programs that could be implemented that we have accessibility to that could move us closer to great? But then what is the feasibility of implementing those programs against what we know to be our limitations, which is our funding arrangement? And in that feasibility analysis, maybe they would also give us the model that would say, this would have the greatest impact to moving you toward great, understanding that if you don't also do this, you won't have the greatest impact. So collaboratively, you have to do those two things together to get to the best solution. But if you're prioritizing, do this before you do that. And it isn't so much of a funding decision, but it's a feasibility analysis or a implementation analysis or something that gives you some perspective on what is the likelihood of having success, even if you're doing it in stages and covering as many areas as you can. I don't think that's really addressed in any of these bullets. It talks about what are the gaps, what are the barriers, but it doesn't say, tell us that trajectory, tell us that feasibility of implementation. That would be very useful. I don't think the seventh bullet is helpful at all, because you're saying in the negotiations, we're going to ask you to tell us how we're going to get the best value out of you. Pay me a lot of money. I don't know what they'd say to that, but I'm not sure 7 is as useful as something better than what's in 6.
Well, I guess for me, the words that jump out to me are priority, maximize, and return on investment. And I don't have a problem with a consultant telling me that.
Okay.
That's
appreciate
just
your
one,
comments.
and that's just one observation. I think that's what I would ultimately want to be informed of based upon what has been their research.
So I'm, in the interest, so that we can move this forward, I am going to ask you, Ted, to please put this in a parking lot and have you and Holly work on rephrasing this. I totally understand what Darryl is saying about, the language here and asking them for some type of prioritization. I want to make sure that, for me, that when they look at this, they are saying, these are this where your standards are, your targets, where we want to go. This is where you currently are. And based on those standards, these are the areas where you really need to prioritize or should consider prioritizing. And then what programs will allow us to be able to fill those in, but without them dictating to us what funding should be allocated to each of those areas. And that's where I have an issue with that. I don't want a dictation of funding. Okay. All right. So that's something that you all will address?
Yes, ma'am.
Next iteration. Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Jones, does that meet your, okay, awesome. Okay, let's move forward, Mr.
Okay, page 5, really the introduction and solicitation on section 1 on pages 4 and 5 and most of 6 down to C. Most of that, particularly the indented numbers, are from statute. The rest is just kind of been what the history is. In C, minimum qualifications, Mr. Springer suggested that we have a 5-year minimum of experience there. So we've included that. On the next couple of pages, when you get to page 8, the solicitation process, we refer in here to the CSC Leon's purchasing regulations or policy, which will include a number of provisions, obviously, that will govern how this is put on the street and reviewed, and that will be considered by y'all at the next meeting. One of the things that Mr. Springer really pointed out that was really wonderful was pointing out the ITN process, the first paragraph or the first line in the second paragraph there. It's divided into two processes, really, an evaluation process and a negotiation phase. And he suggests that we might want different people or the committee plus other people, and the committee is free to engage others in these exercises. Where you might, and I think Mr. Zox said this, might want in the evaluation phase, folks who know how to crunch the numbers and know how about evaluation and can determine if the numbers that are going to be generated are the numbers that the council really wants and needs. During the negotiation phase, perhaps we need more business-oriented people who can drive a hard bargain and make sure the council is getting the biggest bang for its buck, among others. We'll talk about the negotiation team that's highlighted there a little bit later in green, along with the communications plan. We hope to have a standalone website up and running by the middle of this month, so that we'll be able to begin to brand the CSC and tell the story of what you all are doing, the great work that the council is doing. On page 9 is the timeline. We'll be coming back to this for a discussion about oral presentations in eight bound copies, coming back to that in a little bit. One of the things is if Response spends a lot of money, the CSC will not be responsible for any costs they incur as they go down the road. On page 10, at any point, the council, if it determines that the process is going off the tracks or is not being done the way it should be, it can cancel at no loss. Also, with regard to the responses, the council at that last section H is the sole judge of whether a response is responsive and can kick any of the proposals out that deems appropriate. On page 11, we start getting into the content of what will be in the proposal. The response format and content in number 3, you can see first is a cover letter. We'll be coming back to the 30-page limitation for a broader discussion in a minute. And then we get to B, respondent experience and qualifications. This is a very important section. This will be actually scored as part of the scoring process for how well the ITN is responded to. And basically it looks at the respondent's capability and capacity to get the job done. Included in that is number 5, which addresses diversity and participation of historically disadvantaged business enterprises to make sure that we reflect the council's interest in ensuring that those types of issues are addressed. On the next page, so that's basically the respondent's overall experience, and that will be scored. The next thing that will be scored is the specialized expertise on page 12. The specialized expertise goes into a number of things. You can see number 1, experience working with community partnerships. Number 2, understanding population and community level risks. And then 3 through 7 really address what has been expressed by the council as an interest in terms of understanding diversity, equity, and inclusion, overrepresentation of minority children and youth in the systems of care, identifying prevention strategies and programs to reduce that overrepresentation, et cetera. So this is going to be the second of 5 things that will be scored when the respondents put their packages in. The next is a service description. One of the things that will be most interest to the committee as you move forward is on the last line there. They will provide a timeline with deliverables, drafts, and final reports and updates to the council. So we'll be able to plan schedules going forward. On the next page, stuff you've already seen. Again, one of the things that kind of pleased me about Mr. Springer was, and his review was, he kept all the substance that we had in terms of the deliverables and whatnot. He tightened up and got rid of some of the fluff because there was some fluff in there, but he really on the technical side added a lot, and he did tighten up significantly all the rest of it. But all of this other language you've seen here, except the key outcomes. I'm going to get into that in a minute when we get to the deliverable part. One of the things he did suggest is on E at the bottom of the page that we do indeed include the amount that is budgeted, so that the respondents will know how to plan their budget, et cetera. On page 14, and you'll be coming back to this page for a couple of issues. You see we've got the evaluation team and the negotiation team again, but also on this evaluation criteria. The weights and the percentages that are there were just weights that we threw in. We grabbed them out of the air as staff. You may decide that they're completely out of line and off base as you discussed that today. but you'll see the evaluation criteria. The first one on page 11, the respondent's experience. On page 12, the specialized expertise. On beginning on page 19, we'll be going over really the deliverables that we've talked about in terms of the needs assessment. The fourth one is budget. And then the fifth is just general adherence to the ITN. The next 5 or 6 pages are really all about the negotiation process. I didn't want to go into them, but we have talked about how the process is subject to sunshine law. And you'll see on page 16 that when the council or a committee is negotiating with any of the respondents, excuse me, there don't have to be people in the room as is required for the open meetings. However, if the committee decides not to have people in the room, the sunshine does require that all of the conversation that takes place is recorded, and it will be provided to the public thereafter. Well, yes, the meeting will have to be publicly noticed, but it doesn't mean the public would depending on the committee's decision, would be allowed to be in the same room at the same time. So it's a change in the sunshine from, okay, people are going to be there contemporaneously when you're speaking versus they're not going to be there, but they're going to hear exactly what you said within a short period of time.
So if I'm understanding correctly, it gives us the opportunity to determine the negotiation type information privately, but they will have access to it later to be able to understand how we came to those conclusions. But it's to give people, they won't have the advantage of knowing what we're going to ask as a part of the negotiations.
That's exactly right. And Walter probably knows more about this, but the sense is if you're negotiating with one, then you're going to negotiate with another, and yet they're hearing what you're doing. Say, but in your negotiations, there it could. Basically, yes, sir. So that's what that is on page 16. Then skipping several pages forward to page 19, the draft statement of work. Now, this has really been reordered in a lot of ways to make it more clear. But with the purpose, the one sentence there on the purpose was buried in the text that we had. And as Holly and I were looking at this, we said, this is really the fundamental purpose, number one. The specific goals there that have the numbers associated with them are really generally what we had in it. Number 2 is the gaps. Number 3 is the inventory. Number 4 are the examples from around the state and country. And number 5 is the funding. Mr. Croteau helped with reestablishing the language on that to make sure that it indeed generates what we need. But what he did with number 1 is what I think has transformed this from a needs assessment where you see what the numbers are into a tool that will, an informative tool that the council will be able to use for many years to come to really determine how you fund and how you address the issues in the community. And I was going to go into a diatribe about outcomes and measures, but I think you've heard from Mr. Croteau and from Xander, who you articulated that just like what it's all about. So basically what this could become is the report card that the council has moving forward. So it's very exciting, I think, and it ensures transparency, accountability, et cetera, ease of understanding of what the council is all about. On the rest of that page are definitions. You can see the definition number 8 and key outcomes. They're the outcomes in each priority area that address short, mid, and long-term success for y'all. So during one of the first deliverable phases, there are somewhere in the neighborhood of 16 or 17 different priorities within the priority areas. And they will come back and say, for each of those 16 or 17, here's the outcomes you could look for, and here's how you measure whether you're getting those outcomes or not. And at that point, the council will need to decide, okay, which of these 17 And there's going to be probably several for each of those 17. Which of those outcomes do we want to have as a priority? From there, after those are selected, then the gaps and the inventory and the practices will focus right on those so that we can do a deep dive into each of those areas. Yes, sir.
And I know we put it in a parking lot, right? But if we go back to this statement of work on page 19, number 5, does that not provide the same type of description as was found on the first page?
As in on page 8, the other item.
But I talked about on page 4, number 6, which we put in the parking lot.
Oh,
Did
yeah.
we not find it here yet again in number 5?
Well, in the first issue, it was tell us how to prioritize. In this, it says provide funding options.
If you know, I mean, I didn't know if we needed to wordsmith this no different than we did that. It just seemed to me as if we were much of the same.
Mhm.
That's the only reason I mentioned it.
Mhm.
But thanks. But it does appear
Maybe similar.
similar idea, which, like I said, I'm good with.
Yeah.
I just don't want to appear disingenuous. I want
Sure.
to share the same perspective every time it is referenced, that it's all good with me. Yeah, I wondered about that.
Expedited. Okay, thanks.
I was like, oh, well, maybe that's the
Expedited.
progressive Sharon. I got my degree in English, but sometimes that's what it is. It's got his name in it. I love it.
Well, one of the things I really want to express appreciation to Mr. Croteau. Now I'm doing Mr. Croteau is when we first started this process, it was our take that those key outcomes and measurables would come after the gaps and the inventories and whatnot were done, so that you'd know where the gaps and whatnot were. So, but this puts it right up front, which really enhances the ability of the vendor to do that deep dive into zip code and school zones, et cetera, et cetera.
If I may ask, and again, this is just, first of all, let me say this, preface my comment by saying this. This is really good.
Yes,
I think
It's
Yeah.
very good.
Daryl,
But-
will you please take your mask off? I'm having trouble hearing you. I'm
You're
sorry.
having trouble
I
hearing me,
am,
really?
Yes, I am.
The voice, really? All right, how's that?
Thank you, thank you.
All right, so this is very, very good.
Mhm.
Thank you.
It's really fantastic. And I think about from what we started from and to where we are now, you can see that this is truly the expertise of those and those who helped to author it is just superb. And I also appreciate the fact that what has been our observations, mine most specifically, I've seen addressed throughout the document, and I appreciate that. It's good to know that when you say something, people hear you and say subsequently respond. That means a lot to me, right? Not that I'm not saying that doesn't happen at the district, but I just thought I'd just throw that in there. But what I am concerned about is that in the latter part of 5, the latter part of 5, do we want to provide that type of specificity? It seems as if we might be. I mean, if it is our intent that we want that to be included, then say that include that and others. But when we say this may include, it seems as if it is a suggestion, which I'd rather we tell them we want it, plus whatever other things they would bring as experts in the field beyond that. But this is what we would want to have included at a bare minimum. And then that would mean we would use stronger language rather than may.
May include, among others.
And I have no problem with what you've described here. But then if that's what we want at a bare minimum for them to include, then let's ask them to do that, not may it, but include that. And whatever other additional information or examples based upon your expertise in the area, or however you want to phrase it. You feel me?
Yeah, I understand. So the way I read this is it gives them the option to pass or play. You know, they can provide these things. They don't have to. And what I'm hearing from you, Daryl, is either tell them, yes, we want these, or give them the option of adding other things to this list.
Right, I mean, why include it if we don't want it?
I wonder if this is included in here to respond to what some council members said, and sort of as Fritz's comments, that says that this can include incentives to small businesses. In other words, to make it plain that we're not trying to build a system that is purely nonprofit.
I think this came from Ms. McFadden.
Ms. McFadden, yes.
Yeah,
ma'am.
yeah, because I think her point was she wanted them to be able to say, there are other things that should be included or can be included that aren't necessarily service-related type activities. And I think this was language she recommended.
Yes.
Am I correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right. So are we going to address Daryl's point? Are we going to say
Well,
other things can be added?
just a quick comment. This is a draft statement of work. For those who are familiar with the ITN process, the unique part about Florida law allows you to change on a dime kind of what you want to do. So when you get into actual contract negotiations and you're working through a statement of work, the wordsmithing on this language can be done at that time. If you think it's a problem for somebody being able to respond to this ITN, that needs to be clearer, I would spend a lot of time on it. I don't think this needs to be perfectly clear for the purpose of the ITN. It does need to be when we get to negotiations, because that's going to end up being in the contract, those words.
But you know, as a grant writer, the statement of work is our bread and butter.
Understand?
The response to the statement of work, that is constitutes the most important part of our response to that, as well as the budget. So I just think that ambiguous language like may.
Right. And I was going to just use the word, I was going to use the word examples include.
Okay, that works.
And then then it's not like you're asking for permission or you're not saying this is okay, but you're just, yeah. And I think that this is referring to the innovative interventions. Is that accurate?
Correct. That's correct.
So it might even be clearer that say innovative interventions include, or examples of innovative interventions include, and that way, really, this is just a parentheses after innovative interventions, giving them ideas of what we're talking about. Because some people may not know what that means, but it gives us some ideas. I just didn't want y'all to feel like you would be obligated to this language. This language can be massaged as we get to negotiations.
Thank you for
So, so definitions remain on page 19 and on through the deliverables, the key outcomes and measures that y'all discussed. On the next page, the program inventory
What page are you on?
on page 21. Moving on through at the bottom of the page, you see the federal funds that Ms. Fritz mentioned, and look into that. The gap analysis on the next page, page 22. Again, all of this information has been in the previous documents. One of the things that as we were working through this that we found was that we talk about the gaps and whatnot, but we didn't talk about the reasons for the gaps. So in the middle of the page there, 3B, you'll see that we asked them to describe the potential reasons for the gaps and the historical trends that might provide more insight as you go down the road to try to address those issues. Funding options, again, the same as have been in the past with regard to the expedited funding awards. And then the long-term awards. What we did add was the short, mid, and long-term, so that y'all would have even more options as you look at how you might provide funding. Page 23 is the payment schedule. It's green on project governance documents because I wasn't sure what that was. I'm not sure if you do, Walter, that it's a specific deliverable. But we'll clarify that with Mr. Springer as we go down or early this next week. Page 24 are the priority areas. Highlighted in yellow it relates to the discussion that y'all had at your last meeting for discussion later on today, and then the disclosure form so that the respondents will at least state that they are not trying to defraud us.
Thank you very much, Ted, for reviewing this. Take a sip of water. That was very good. Thank you so much. I know. I do completely agree with Mr. Jones. This reads so much cleaner than it did before. So thank you very much for reviewing that. Okay, we have 2 hours to get through some priority areas that I want to make sure we definitely address. So I'm going to go, Ted helped me prioritize some specific things that I want to make sure we get through, and then hopefully we'll be able to get through all of them so that we can abbreviate our conversation on the 19th. Let's start on page number 14, Ted. If we can start with the conversation about the evaluation criteria and the scoring. Thank you very much, Mr. Cruto. We appreciate you. Thanks so much. Okay. We're on page 14. Okay, and as Ted was reviewing this, he indicated that these were the evaluation criteria, which are defined on the previous pages, starting on page 11. And so we want to have our committee pay attention to the weights, the percentages. They just pull them out of the air, like he indicated, but are we comfortable with having, for the first area, which is their experience and qualifications with a weight of 20%, their specialized expertise with a weight of 20%, their actual deliverables on completing, the tasks that are in the scope of work at 35%, having the budget at 20%, and then what was the last section? I didn't write that down.
Just adherence to the term.
Adherence, okay.
They followed the directions.
So let's have a quick conversation about the weights. One request that I have, if you all can add a column to the left that just defines what each of these categories are. So, the first one is related to the experience and qualifications, just so it's clear. The second row is, related to their specialized expertise so that they can refer back to some of the things in the previous pages and know that these are the weights for these particular areas. One request that I have.
They show us a history of activity in that area, plus references to that work. Well, now I'm not certain what it would be, but I think that I see that represented.
It's-
Would it fit in the first
It does.
category and references are not in there?
It's on page 12. Yeah, on page 12, number 9, provide a list of 3 client references, their name, phone number, and that's included in the first row. Do you see that?
You could say qualifications, references, because it doesn't say reference.
So Ted, I think the recommendation is on page 11B, change it to respondent experience, qualifications, and references, just to call it out.
I'm sorry, what number are you on?
So I'm on page 11.
Oh, I see. Okay, I'm sorry.
I was going to suggest the same thing that such a novel.
Yes, please, please.
It's such a novel. Seems like we're asking for such best way to judge what you've done. What performance can you demonstrate?
Yeah.
I would suggest maybe that would be for the highest value.
I'd like to make a suggestion because I think it's going to be hard for an evaluator to judge between the first and second block. The first speaks to qualifications expertise references. The second speaks to expertise, capability, and resources. The difference is specialized versus generic. If you're looking to sort of expand the role of this section, maybe the 40% weight
Combined it.
on all of their expertise, including specialized expertise, would be a better measure of their history, all of the stuff, right? Instead of having to bifurcate it or try to figure out what's what.
40% is on expertise, and then we decide whether their expertise is special.
Yeah, you could further defend the score. I want to talk briefly about the table and its concept, because I don't think I'm balanced on it. If you only can get 10 points in each section to add up to 50, yet you've weighted them differently, that makes no sense. So the 20% should be 20% of something. And I'm sure it's a whole. So if 20% is of 50, then the first one can't possibly be weighted at 10.
10 points equals 20%.
Yeah, it doesn't make, if 10 also equals 35%, then that doesn't make, yeah.
We just get to do, let's just do a total of 100 points.
But
Yeah.
Is there
there,
a reason? Is there a reason?
I think the up to 10 is confusing and the 50 is confusing, but if it is 50, you can't say up to 10. If it's 100, then obviously it's up to the percentage amount.
Yep.
If it's 500, then it's up to 1/5 of the percentage amount, whatever the number, we'll get there, but I just don't think it makes sense on its face. So I wanted to get that off the table because that was just eating me up. But I think merging the top two may be the best solution to the confusion I'm seeing between the two.
There may be a variety of specific level of expertise. Right? And if we drop it all into 40, the 10% would be that person who has done these assessments for like Children's Services Council. That expertise would be weighted differently than just having doing the assessment. And I think we would be able to. So if you're awarding points.
So the specific expertise would be a plus.
Exactly.
That's what you're saying.
And that's all I'm saying. I think that math would matter.
Right.
And we might miss that if it's all lumped up.
Like,
Does the ITN define what we mean by specialized expertise?
Only in the numbers that follow the title. So on page 12, the specialized expertise is defined basically as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
And while the judge is looking at that, I agree that experience is significant, but I don't want us to lose sight of the third row. I do think that should be weighted heavily. So when you add these two sections up, their expertise weighs more than what they say they're going to do for us. So I think there's a lot of value in what they've done in the past, but I want to know, what are you going to do with our needs assessment? And I think to have them explain that to us very clearly and demonstrate that they can bring value to us, to me, that's worth more than what you've done in the past. That makes sense.
So maybe if we say, get back to the specialized expertise, maybe if we just actually reference where specialized expertise, because it is pretty specifically defined. That long list of specialty. Page 12, there's a specialized specialized expertise 1 through 7. So Walter, if we're asking for them to specifically respond to specialized expertise, that does seem like something reasonable.
yeah, and I like the idea of it being in the concept of being an add-on specificity. I like that concept maybe of taking the first one and weighting it a little bit more and the second one weighting it a little bit less in order to say it's on top of. But I also appreciate that the 35% might be low
It's
compared to then the accumulation of 40%. So, and jump that one to 40.
Well, I was proposing, I think that's worth it.
Now we gotta find another 5 points to it.
Well, you
No,
could put, you
that-
could
I'm
put,
gonna put that in
you
number
could put
3.
40 in that one.
I put 40. I did
Oh,
20,
all right,
I did
all right,
20,
all right, I'm
20,
wrong.
I did 20, 15, and 40 is where I'm feeling. 20 in the first row, the experience and qualifications, 15 in specialized expertise, and 40 in the deliverables.
Yeah, and that's also ability to meet.
Correct.
Yeah, I think.
Does that add enough weight to the specialized expertise? 15? Okay. Yeah. So- Okay. You're
Well, I think we're there. I think
Okay.
25, 15, 40.
Uh,
Even though we gave them the budget.
Point of clarification.
Yes, please.
Judge, I thought you said, just said it's 25,
20.
15, and 40, but is
It's
it
20,
20? Okay.
15, 40, 20, and 5, right? No problem.
Okay.
Of course.
Should not be allowed to say.
No, I value you. Okay, so I think, does everybody agree? Does anybody disagree with that? Okay, so. What? 20%? State your case, please, sir.
The
Yeah.
Well, I think the challenge on this is the evaluation of what is submitted. If you look at the instructions on the bottom of page 13, you'll see that they are supposed to justify their proposed terms. I would imagine that would mean that they would give us a budget, some sort of budget narrative, details, and then each evaluator having its 20% of points available to them would make some judgment on whether it has merit. That's a hard thing to do with very little guidance, because in an ITN, you are really supposed to be individually evaluating each one for its own value. And you might actually find some evaluators just comparing, which is really not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to evaluate it on its own merits. And it's not something that's highly considered in an ITN so much. I mean, it really is about the value that you're bringing to the table, but price obviously can be a consideration. It's always a hard thing to talk about when you're dealing with points and assessing points. Some committees actually reserve the price evaluation to an accountant and say, hey, give that to the accountant in the group, let them do the evaluation. The rest of the team's going to evaluate the rest of it. And then you just take their score and drop it in. That way it's one person doing it. It's not 5 or 6 people evaluating it all differently.
So should we reduce price to 10%?
I think it might be smart to find an evaluator who has the competency to evaluate price and have it, that's something to consider, is have it as a separate evaluation.
Right.
It is what it is. Exactly.
Whoever's low bidder, get the maximum. So what we would do is we think our effective based upon then actually support it, then the price would be added on based upon who was the lowest bidder.
It's often why you get people to propose price separately and you open it separately so that your evaluators aren't conflicted by looking at what the price is.
looking at it.
That would be good to talk to Fred about and get his input on, because it's often done that you get a price proposal separate. Something to consider.
So what are we proposing we do with the budget line, the financial line?
It can stay there as how you would go about evaluating it, setting up your evaluation team.
Okay,
Your evaluation team might be 5 or 6 people. I don't know what the number is going to be, but you might want to reserve the price evaluation to a
Separate
single
that.
person, let them do that, and then have those scores just added in.
okay, so we can still leave it in. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No.
It's
Just point of
the
clarification.
weighting is what you guys need to decide.
Correct.
Is that the right weight for a price part of it?
Another point of clarification, are y'all saying too that it should be separated from the other proposals so that the evaluators of the substance of the proposal don't have the funding?
That would
piece
be
in
my
front of them?
recommendation, but let the committee decide. Not on the committee.
Does the ITN as it exists now define how the negotiating team evaluates price?
It doesn't, other than what's right here.
So I mean, I don't know that we need to go through the rigmarole of changing all of this. Define the roles of negotiating.
Yeah, I think the instructions to the respondent are sort of found in the section 3 at the top on page 11. And it says you will respond to each 5 separately tabbed areas, A through E, E being, I believe, financial terms.
Yeah.
You could simply say, submit your response to section E separately.
Yeah.
It's a 1 sentence add, but I'd want you to talk to Fred and make sure procurement wise that that's something he'd be comfortable with in the ITN model that we're using. And it tends to lessen the impact on the evaluators when you're looking at price. It does cause you to have a perspective when you see the price.
Are we comfortable with the 20% weight? I want to make sure we are firm on that.
I'm a little worried that I think we're gonna be spending awfully close to 300. And I would hate to think somebody based on a $10,000 difference, $300,000 contract. Experience. I wonder, I don't know, I mean, I would be looking at, I worry that it sends the wrong message maybe to the bidders that desperately worried about. That's the budget. I don't know. To value it at the same as the organization experience.
I don't know that, but I think there's a person speaking.
Yes, sir.
So for example, our and the person will see them.
Right,
Right. So if that's the case,
doesn't matter.
do we have to?
Yeah,
It's
I
an
agree.
awfully big job. we're asking. I don't think we want to send that message.
To waste so heavy that if someone responds to bidder, they don't have the same other priority.
Excuse me, some folks in the audience can't hear, so make sure your microphone is.
I would also say it's important for us to realize that in the ITN process, there is part of the schedule that includes questions and answers. And it is legitimate that we will have a question about the budget. And would the council consider a higher proposal, or how was the price determined? That sort of answer needs to be thought of, and we need to be supportive of it as a council so that everybody understands that the budget wasn't just a whim, that it actually came from something, came from experience, or what other councils had invested in needs assessments, whatever it is. So that if you decide to either put less points on it or take it out of the evaluation criteria, or live with what you get and evaluate it on a small number, just know why you set that threshold. That's pretty important for us to have in our back pocket.
So I do have a question. Based on your experience, the fact that we set this budget, we're telling them the amount of money that we have set aside for this.
Sure.
What is the likelihood that we will get some proposals that are higher than that amount of money?
Unlikely, because that you're saying that that's our limit. And
Right.
so if a respondent wants to be responsive,
Right.
they will respond within that dollar amount. You may get questions about your flexibility to go above it. And if in your answer, you say you would accept proposals higher than that, then you will get proposals higher than that.
Right.
So it depends on how you answer that hard question when it comes in, and it will likely come in.
And that's why I was asking the question. I mean, we give them the budget. I feel as if they're all going to come in at this amount of money. So why do we even have a line item for that? I think we should evaluate it on experience, deliverables, what are you going to do? Given the fact that I think they're all going to come in at $300,000. Okay.
The out-of-market vendor would not have the same infrastructure as an in-market vendor. And so I think that might be where part of the way you will see the evaluation of price. That's where that local preference that I had also talked about, do we want to give, but you'll catch it in price because somebody out of Chicago is going to have a whole lot more infrastructure costs compared to, say, for example, we were to use someone here locally. So that would be one of the places where you'll find that difference.
So are we proposed to reducing the budget line item to 10% then?
I love that.
And reallocate, I'm sorry.
I love that.
You like that? Okay. So let's reduce the budget to 10% because there is the probability that we'll probably get some variability in the budget there. So that gives us 10% to reallocate in, I would say, the top 3 categories.
Yeah. Yep.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I must leave you.
Oh, no.
Thank you, Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Darryl.
We can get some work done.
We've got a lot
Okay,
of work.
thank you
done.
very much. We appreciate your participation today. Okay,
And we still have a quorum, I think.
I think we do.
Yeah. we got-
Okay, we do. Thank you, Darryl. Okay. So if we move the budget item to 10%, that gives us 10% to reallocate in these different areas.
And where are we at on the other ones now? Before we.
So currently, we're at 20% for the first one, experience and qualifications, 15% with specialized expertise, and 40% at deliverables. Do we take,
I'd go 25% on the first one. Is
okay,
that okay with you? What do you think, Carmen?
I was hesitating, what if we made it 10%? What if it was 5% and then give it the other categories?
5% of each?
Perfect.
Because
Okay.
of the feeling, I heard what both of you were saying, this is
Mhm.
all very unique, but most of them will come close to the same, be it they're local or not. So basically, that part's gonna be the same thing, and why not give that rate in a different place? So I would say 5% there, and then spread the remaining 50% in each.
Okay, so that takes us to 25, 30, 45, and 5. Does that equal 100? That's what I'm trying to figure out. 25,
Are we taking out 15%? So we're going down to 5%.
I'm
So
sorry,
we're
yeah,
doing 5,
to
that was
20, 20.
20,
45, 5,
5,
and 5. That's perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Carmen. All right, so where
Jen,
we
did you
are
get all
right
that?
now, yeah, I'm gonna repeat it. Where we are right now, for experience and qualifications, we are at 25%, specialized expertise, 20%, deliverables, 45%, which I'm happy about. Budget is down to 5%, and then the last line item is 5%. And then that takes us to 100%.
And I'm going to give you guys an example. So as an evaluator, you could see what it looks like. Up the word, by the word points, put 200 possible or 200, just to give you an idea. next to your first one, you would put in 50. The next one would be 40. The third one would be 90 points. And then the last two would be 10 and 10. That would give you 200 points. And that way you can see what a percentage looks like: 50, 40, 90, 10, 10. It's probably where your head's at. If it's 100 points, it looks like 25, 20, 45, 5, and 5. So there's another way to do it, but I like the more flexibility for evaluator to have 10 points to work
Yeah.
with and 5 points. So I would
Agree.
ask that there be a 200 scale and it'd be a 50, 40, 90, 10, 10 model. But that does show you the difference between a 90 for that middle and the two 10s at the bottom.
Perfect.
Just
Yeah.
because some people aren't used to looking at percentages.
Thank you very much for that example, Walter. I think that works very well. Are any of you opposed to the 200 points and the percentages, the weights? Okay. Ted, I think we're good there. Awesome.
Excellent.
All right, thank you very much. All right, moving on. Let's go to page number 24, everybody. If I can find it, okay. Okay, so at the very bottom where Ted highlighted, so this came up on our last meeting where we were talking about all of the different things that would fit under stable and nurturing families and communities. And the very bottom, we had supporting caregivers. And then I think Ms. McFadden, who unfortunately is not here, asked that we also included language on expanding the number of caregivers or increasing the number of caregivers. Ted, I know we had a quick conversation about this. Will you please talk a little bit about why that may be a conflict or showing duplication of effort based on some additional programs?
So I took away from the last meeting that the committee was thinking about inserting recruiting or expanding or in some form addressing the need for additional caregivers. The local CBC, the community-based care organization, receives about $100 million a year from the legislature to do just that. And so there could be an issue. Tell me, no, am I wrong? It's about 97 million.
I mean, that's the total of what they receive, but it isn't all for that.
Well, this is in their job, their responsibility.
Right.
Yes,
And
I didn't mean to say
They
that.
also cover 12 counties.
Uh-huh.
So Leon is
Mhm.
the segregation of that, and they do a lot more than. just
Well,
that.
yes.
So, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Just don't use that dollar amount. It's not fair for this discussion. It's not their sole job.
I was, and I stand corrected. I apologize for that. It appeared to me that it may be a duplication of services.
Yeah, I would argue that any community effort that's put toward recruiting more caretakers for our children, whether they be relative, non-relative, informal care, formal care, everyone should celebrate, whether it be the county that's pushing that, the CSC that's pushing that, the CBC. It never could be duplicative in the shortage that we have.
And aren't we going to ask them to identify gaps? If they come back and tell us, well, there's no gaps, we're buried in caregivers. Well, we need to get rid of some caregivers. We just got too darn many caregivers.
Yeah.
I don't think they're going to tell us that. I think they're going to tell us, we look for caregivers all day, every day.
Thank you for that clarification. So in terms of changing that, supporting and expanding the number of caregivers.
Yes. So supporting and expanding the number of caregivers, and we're going to leave out recruiting. That word. Okay, perfect. I'm good with that. Is everybody
Perfect.
comfortable with that?
Perfect.
Moving right along, guys.
Plus, I
Wonderful.
don't want Liza to think that as soon as she was gone, we
Oh,
just
I
cut all of
know,
her
I know.
suggestions out.
I know, absolutely. Okay, this one I think we'll have to spend a little bit of time on. Page number 14. Let's talk a little bit about the evaluation team, the negotiation team, who should be on it. Is it page 14? No, page 15, I apologize.
Could I ask, Madam Chair, if we could go back to a content before we get into the
Yes.
process?
Yes,
I made a note as Ted was reviewing, and I want to get to it just so I can highlight it. Where did it go? It may not have been.
Page 8?
It was page 11,
11.
and it's at the bottom. And I love the idea of the respondent telling us on number 6 about whether they had a contract with a CSC. It says disclose the entity with whom you worked and their primary contact. That's interesting, but I would also like to know the scope of work for that engagement. Like, what were you doing for the CSC? I don't want to have to call that entity and say, can you tell us the business you did if it's not relevant? But if they tell us the scope of work for that engagement, we would know more about whether we should reach out and make a contact and see how they did. So if we could just add in the scope of work of the engagement, that would be
Point we have taken. Thank you.
useful. And then the other comment I had before we go to the process is I was moved by the comment that you brought to the table from our speaker, who I'm not going to pronounce his name because I'm not good at it, about the expertise in these areas. And the expertise associated with our priority areas, I think, is critically important. And maybe even having done a needs assessment in the area of those priority areas. What I'm trying to do is find that in C. And
What
in
page are you
C,
on?
this
Yeah.
is page 12,
Page 12.
specialized expertise. It talks about working with community partnerships, understanding populations, understanding diversity and equity, then we go into underrepresentation. But I don't see where we have the specified experience of conducting needs assessments on these priority areas.
It's on number 7 at the top of page 12 in the organizational.
That's a human services needs assessment for any governmental entity.
Governmental or other entity.
Right, but that just talks about their experience with needs assessment. It doesn't relate to specialized experience. Because when we talk about these buckets, and I love that we have them, success in school and life, including readiness and school age supports, healthy children, youth, and families, including physical and mental health, and then the stable and nurturing families, those 8 buckets that we have, those are priority areas I think our best respondent would have experience in doing needs assessments on.
Why don't we,
I don't see how we have that in C.
can we just, in C after the comma, including needs assessments?
Under 1, 2, or where are you
I'm
thinking?
just talking about under C, under the introductory sentence.
Ah,
C, specialized expertise. Restate each item in boldface type and address.
It has to be in one of the 7. Because they're going to respond to each of the 7 items.
Yeah, but if we say an experience in, or just experience, comma, including needs assessments with each of the following areas. Because we want to know if they've done a needs assessment on working with community partnerships or understanding. Is that how, am I missing something, Walter?
No, I think you're getting to it, but I guess I was thinking that if we're going to ask them to respond to each of these areas, we don't want their needs assessment experience in each of these areas, but maybe something specific about their needs assessment experience on our priority areas.
Correct. So I would put that in number 1 then, under specialized expertise. We would like to know their experience in completing needs assessments in the priority areas, and I would list our priority areas.
With those community partnerships.
Correct.
Yeah, so in these priority areas found in Exhibit 2 or Attachment 2 or whatever, with those partnerships, organizations, that would do it. Because then their answer is specific to their experience on our priority needs.
That works for me. Does that mean?
Definitely.
Fine by me.
Right,
Thank you.
did you capture that, Ted?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. What else did you have for us, Mr. Sachs?
That was it. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Now let's talk about the roles of the evaluation team and the negotiations team. So if we can go to page 15. And Walter, I understand you have some experience with this. I'm just going to ask you to share with us what your experience is. What do you recommend we do with regards to the evaluation team? Is that something that this committee would be responsible for? The negotiations, who else we could possibly invite to make sure that these committees are strong and complete?
Well, one of the caveats that we have to, I guess, live within is that as a CSC, our procurement policies and procedures are not completely documented yet. So we don't have any governing document that says what we may do or what we may not do. So it is limiting in that there's not a boundary. In Florida law, under the ITN model, you're supposed to have 3 people at a minimum who have expertise in the area to conduct the negotiations.
Okay.
So your negotiation team should never be less than 3. And it must be people who have expertise. That's sort of the most guiding principle that you get in Florida law. Who those people are, whether they are of your committee, separate from your committee, whatever, whether they're doing an evaluation or negotiation, they must have no conflicts of interest. So you have to vet them prior to their activity that they've had no conflicts of interest. So if you have them on an evaluation team, you know who your respondents are when you get your proposals or your replies. At that point, you have to then quiz each of your evaluators if they have any conflict of interest with any of these entities. Then they have to know who the entities are and sign that. Once you've shortlisted and you've gotten down to 2, 3 who you want to negotiate with, you would do the same conflict of interest with your negotiation team and make sure nobody who you put on a negotiation team had a conflict of interest. So that you set that concern aside before each of those events. The people on your evaluation team do not have to be on your negotiation team. The people on your negotiation team do not have to be on the evaluation team. There is some thought that it would be easier to negotiate a contract if you knew why it was selected as the best value vendor. It's always kind of strange to go to negotiations trying to figure out, why did we get this guy?
Yeah.
Because I don't like, whatever. So if you have some crossover, that's a real good thing, but it doesn't have to be perfect alignment. So all of that said, Dr. Glenn, is that it's pretty wide open. You can have community folks. As an agency, when we do procurements, we love to have community input, and we in fact have community members sit on negotiation teams, but they're never the majority. The majority is always going to be someone from the entity, the agency. So if you're going to seat 3 people from our council on the negotiation team, having 2 community members would be a good mix. If you have 6 of us 10 on it, you could have 5. It's just how you set it up. Now, the evaluation side of it, less is more. If you have 17 evaluators, it becomes problematic just in managing and logistics. So you want to govern how many evaluators you have by your logistical capacity to manage them. Your negotiators, you can set it up with roles. You can have a lead negotiator. You can have subject matter experts who participate and help the negotiation team, but don't sit at the table and talk. It's just a gamut of things you can do.
So my question is, do we have to lay those out specifically in the ITN now as to how we're going to, build our evaluation and negotiations team? Can we say we will have a negotiations team, we will have an evaluation team, get this out the door, and then as this is being done, then our committee sits down and say, we want 7 people, and we want 3 people with expertise, 4 people from this committee. I mean, do we have the leeway to do that later?
100%.
Okay. Are y'all opposed to that?
No, this is great.
Okay.
I've given me much more confidence, the 2 of you.
Okay.
And I spoke with Ted about this earlier when we talked, is that to do it best, you have an evaluation handbook and you
Okay.
teach your evaluators how to score applications before they all come in,
Okay.
because they are doing it independent and they can't communicate with each other. And so the evaluators are scoring those and turning them in, and you don't want to have to work through people who didn't know how to follow instructions. So you have a guide, you have teaching. You do the same thing with your negotiation team. And we talked about doing strategy sessions. Strategy sessions can also be held out of the sunshine. So your negotiation team can meet. It's recorded so that it's available as a public record, but you can meet as a team and talk about how are we going to approach this vendor? What strengths and weaknesses do we see in their proposal? What angle are we going to take?
Right.
And of course, they can meet separately too as a vendor. I talked to Ted about the room you negotiate in. We need to have breakout rooms in case they want to go strategize and come back to the table. So all of that environmental stuff has to be considered when you do negotiations.
So with the language that we have in here right now, can we simply leave it that we will have the negotiations and the evaluation team, then we will continue to convene to lay out specifically what we're going to have as a part of that? I don't think we need more specificity in here for now.
Correct.
Do you agree? Okay. everybody comfortable with that?
Yes.
So Ted, we're going to leave the language as is, and then we have more work. I didn't realize we were going to have more work, but we will take on that work to lay out specifically how we're going to manage the evaluation and negotiations teams and who will be the people invited to be a part of those. That works?
Yes.
Okay. Moving right along, everybody. Okay, page limitations. Let's go to page number 11. Okay. We currently have at the top, right above letter A, that the respondent concisely and will respond concisely and avoid superfluous, whatever that word is, information, and a response will not exceed 30 pages. I know that Ms. McFadden, unfortunately, who's not here, did not want a limitation for the number of pages. I am a fan of page limitations, but Walter, once again, you have experience with this. What's been your experience? What do you recommend with regards to the number of page limitations we have?
I would coach you not to put a limitation on the pages. I think that we're asking these vendors for a lot. And really putting some perspective around how verbose they need to be is I understand the messaging that they need to be concise and to the point and not add on a whole bunch of extra appendages that aren't needed. But I would not want us to be able to get the best concept of what they can do by putting a page limit on it, not having any real understanding of what 30 pages looks like. You've hung 45 points on a pretty big area. And that responsiveness, if you just took the 8 areas we had and they broke them down into 2 pages each, that's 16 pages. That's half of your limit. They don't even talked about their experience yet. So it seems arbitrary, and I'm not real sure that that makes sense unless someone has said, I've done these 1,000 times and we never needed more than 30 pages to figure out if they're best value. I don't have that experience. I think it's wise not to put a limit on the response.
On the response. Okay, when I read this, I thought 30 pages should definitely be an adequate amount of space for them to explain to us how they're going to be. And I do understand. I believe that this is a heavy effort. But let me turn to the other committee members. Do y'all have any experience with this? And how do you all feel with limitations or not?
I don't have any experience with it, but in my head, I was thinking, okay, limit the number of pages. I'm just thinking about the process that goes into it. And I feel like in some point you can say what you need to say in a clear and concise way by having a limit. But I hear what you're saying too. This is a lot that's being requested. So I don't know. I don't have enough experience to be able to go one way or the other.
My rule for my own writing, 1 page of 14-point type. I can't say it in 1 page of 14-point type. I haven't thought about it enough to simplify the way it should be. A rule I break fairly frequently. Our ITN is 26 pages long of fairly dense requirements. I hate to admit it, but I think Walter's right. It's not that I hate to admit that you're right. It's that I hate to agree that we shouldn't have a page limit.
So
Because what if we get 10 300-page
that's
proposals?
fair.
Oh my goodness.
So can we negotiate a little bit? Why don't we increase the page limit to 40, 45 pages, which I think is reasonable. But it still puts them in a boundary that we need you to be as concise as you possibly be, but not open the opportunity for 10 100-page proposals, which can possibly happen.
45 pages is a lot of pages.
I think it's
Even
a
the
lot of
Supreme
pages, too.
Court, even the US Supreme Court makes you.
I would be careful to make sure your wording is not aspirational. A response should not exceed. That means it could. If you just say it should not, if you say it may not, or it will not, or it shall not, that's different than should not. So you're going to put a page limit and it's going to be non-responsive. If it exceeds that page limit, you have to be ready to reject it if it's too many pages.
Or it's graded, or it's. graded.
Or you
If it's-
score it
if
on
we
that
say-
on that 5% and
Yeah.
say you were way too
Proposal.
superfluous
Yeah.
in your
Yeah.
descriptions. So if vendors are encouraged not to exceed 45 pages, something like that might be a way to say it without saying it.
Okay, so can we fix the language to say a response?
Well, it's aspirational as it's written.
It is aspirational.
And we'll score it. So they can exceed if they think their proposal is so good that they're going to make up those 5 points
Okay.
on the other place. That's the difference. Because if we get one that's 46 pages and we say shall,
They're out the door.
You gotta
right?
toss it.
Okay. So Ted, do you have appropriate language for this? Okay, wonderful. All right, thank you. Thanks for that.
Well, and it pointed, as I understand it, just replace 30 with 45.
Yep.
It's written. Does it sound like to me?
yeah, I think that's what.
Okay. All right, so we are trying to keep them within 45 pages to save the eyes of those that are reading all of this. So thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, the number of bound copies, page number 9. I know. So
Ted's been waiting all day for this.
we currently are proposing that they send, what is the number, 8 bound copies?
It's right under D there.
Yes, 8 bound copies. Okay, there's some people that want to save the trees, and I totally get that. And then there are some that want to lay these things out and read them expeditiously, I guess. I don't know. So my question is, the evaluation team is the team that will be reviewing each of these, correct? I mean, how many people do we expect to be reviewing these? And then we need to make a determination, are we going to require the bound copies, or are we going to just ask for the 1 electronic copy or fewer bound copies? What do y'all want to do? It's open for discussion.
We have to have at least 1 bound copy as the official, with the official
Correct.
sign document at the end.
And I got distracted. I'm sorry. Are they also sending us an electronic copy?
They are required to send, we have to have 1 bound and an electronic copy. Will we be responsible for are we willing to make copies for all the reviewers that request a hard copy? Because I'm gonna request a hard copy. I mean, I'm just saying, I'm old school. I need to lay things out, highlight, write questions, flip flop. I can't do it electronically. So I don't know who the evaluators will be that.
Well, and also under consideration is, in all likelihood, your negotiation team is potentially going to want a version of the proposal or response, whether it be electronic or hard copy. I would tell you as an evaluator, you're not allowed to write in the document. I'll give you an evaluation manual. You can write all your notes in it. I'm not going to let you write in that document because I'm going to, it's going to be a public record. I don't want your notes to be the public record.
Even the bound copy, even not the one that's for the public record, but for the copies that the evaluators use, they can't write notes?
You're creating a public it is a public document that you have in your hands. And when you write in it, it still stays a public document. It doesn't change. So we give you an evaluation manual to write in. We also tell you don't write anything you don't want to read about in the paper in that evaluation document. But you also may want to hand that proposal to a negotiation team member, and you don't want your writing in there when they're reading their proposal, unless you're going to ask for 20 hardbound copies, because you don't know how many evaluators and how many negotiators yet. So you're working with a little bit of an unknown. 8 is a fairly arbitrary number. I would imagine somebody thought, well, we might have 3 evaluators and 4 negotiators, or we might have 4 evaluators and 3. And we came up with 7, plus we needed a hard 8. I don't know where that number came from, but nothing's been settled yet on volume of teams. So I don't know how you got to a number. I always push electronic because I don't think we should put any burden on our vendors that we don't have to. And I've seen hardbound copies come in with stuff missing, and then the procurement manager has to fill the blanks.
Can if we get the electronic version, is there anything that prevents each one of the people that are involved to just print their own copy if they want?
No
If we
problem.
limit it at 45 pages.
Yes, you may have to buy a new toner cartridge.
Right, I know. Okay,
But the fact that you don't write on it, because I'm thinking about myself, if I were evaluating something, I feel the need to write on the document, so now that you can't.
I may have misspoke. You can. As a procurement officer, I would ask you not to. I'd give you a document to write on that has the same format. They put your notes here. Same paragraph alignment, everything, because remember, their instructions are to respond to each of those sections. So we know exactly what we're going to get. We know the format we're going to get it in. So we can give you an evaluation manual that matches that. And you can put all your notes in it.
It's going to have each section of the proposal.
Exactly.
And we may have to ask Pat Gleason when she comes about the public record character of an electronic document that evaluator prints out themselves and then makes notes on. Oh, Lord,
Yes, sir.
makes my head hurt.
And what happens at the end of evaluation is all the evaluators give their hard copies back to the procurement officer. And then the procurement officer either has a stack of 8 hardbound copies that they never touch again, or they then turn them over to the negotiation team and then they turn them back in when they're done and they sit as a public record. So Ted's just creating public records in his files for the reasons.
Okay, so we're not allowed, we will be asked not to write notes, highlight, put questions on that hard copy. Everything goes on the one-page document anyway. The purpose of the hardbound, the reason why I wanted it is to be able to do that, but if we're gonna be asked not to do that, then I don't think there's any reason. I mean, that's my preference. Yeah, I don't think there's any
Electronic.
reason for that. Okay.
So one hardbound. Is that where
One
we're at?
hardbound, yes.
Walter, is that what you're recommending?
Yes, sir.
One hardbound.
Wow, okay.
To have mercy.
And then obviously the PDF is the electronic version that your procurement manager can give to you through email. It also creates the delivery a lot easier. We're all in different offices. We're not together. These things come in, you got to evaluate them. I don't know what time frame it's going to be. It might be 2 weeks. You get that email. It's a lot quicker than them having to find you and hand you a book from which to work from. And if you feel like you need to make paper, you can make paper.
I know. Okay, thank you. I'll go buy a toner. I will make it work. Okay, so we will do one bound copy and the one electronic copy is what they would send on a flash drive. Okay, thank you. All right, guys, we're making progress. All right. The timeline, page number 9. Ted, I'm going to ask you to walk us through this timeline if you don't mind, please, sir.
Sure. So the timeline is a timeline that we've presented before and that y'all have looked at. But as I mentioned, Mr. Springer, who is a very well known in this field, took the dates out that we had for doing the pre-ranking oral presentations by the potential vendors who respond. He has been on vacation this week, and I have not, so we have not connected. It seemed to me as we were talking, Madam Chair, that you were interested in, and the committee was interested because it's been in there to hear the oral presentations. But we understand it. He took it out for a reason. He returns next week on Monday, and we've talked about scheduling a conference call with him to find out why he removed it. And if he had a good reason, which obviously it appears he must, then we'll leave it off. But if the feeling of the council, the committee is very strong that there should be oral presentations, that we can push on that and see if it would compromise the ability of the committee to do its work going forward.
So I do have a question for you. So since we don't know his reasoning now, and I was hoping that we would have a final version for the board by the 19th, can we send out his reason to this committee via email? And then we communicate back to you via email if we agree with that, or if we still feel strongly. And then you take, how would you coalesce everything that we are bringing forward to be able to say, this is the agreed upon decision? Are you able to make that decision and then send that back out to us?
I would be able to gauge what each member says individually, not talking to any of the other members about where the other members are on it and acting as a go-between, and could incorporate it into the final version that I assume you will approve on the 19th. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Are y'all opposed to doing that?
No, very much for that.
Okay, great. Just for the record, I am a proponent for oral presentations. Like, I like to be able to look in the eye of the people that are proposing to do this work and to get an understanding of what it is that they are going to do. But I totally understand his expertise, and I would like to understand why he thought it was important to move it out. So we will, that's what we will do, get his response, and then we will return via email our response to you. Okay. Okay. So that's what we're going to do. Oh, do we need to go through any other steps with the timeline? I think we're good. That was the only major thing you wanted to point out, correct?
Can I highlight a couple of issues?
Please.
Just so you guys
Yeah.
are fully aware of what you're walking into. The ITN is issued on a Monday, August 23rd. Then we get our questions coming in the Friday after that week, which is a 2-week period for them to prepare questions and submit questions. By 2 weeks later, on Thursday, the 16th, we publish those answers. Within about 10 days, the following Friday, maybe 8 days, they have to send their response in. So on the 24th of September, we have our responses. That same day, we're going to do the opening an hour later. The responses are due at a legal office that's not this building. Where is the Olive Miller? Where are they located?
They're over by I-10 in Thomasville.
So at 2 o'clock, someone walks in their door and hands it to them. 3 o'clock, we open here. Is that an issue?
Here?
Is that not here, Leon County Commission Chamber?
Oh, yes, yes.
So is that a problem that an hour later we're opening? Is that okay with everybody? If they walk in that door and hand something in at 2 p.m., can we get it here and open it at 3
Where do we have them delivering it?
to the
Raymond Dean.
legal office?
Their office is at the intersection of I-10 and Thomasville Road, basically.
Oh, okay.
That's always a conundrum at procurement, and I like that it's there. I don't like that it's that far away.
Is it?
Yeah, to 1 o'clock, right, or noon.
Or change the opening to 4 or 5.
Has the opening been publicized yet that we are going to do? I know the date has been decided. Has the time been decided?
There hasn't, and a question for Fred that you may know, Walter, is does the whole committee have to be there, or does Dr. Glenn
Just the
do it?
procurement official, the person who's listed in the IT has to do it. Doesn't have to be anybody but that person.
So it'd be Holly as the,
Holly can do it.
okay.
It's a public meeting, so the people can be there to see who responded. But other than that, no one else has to be in the room.
So can we change the public opening to 4 p.m.?
You have all the room. The caution is that 2 p.m. is an absolute certain. And the farther your opening is from that time, the more slippery slope you introduce. Somebody walk in, like, it's 2:15, can't you just take it? You haven't opened them yet. So you lessen that problem if the closer those times are. I just worried that 1 hour was awful tight.
But
I
2
would-
hours.
I
We'll
would
tell
say,
them.
I would say get the responses in by 1 and then have your opening at 3 like you scheduled. And that way you've got 2 hours for drive time just in case.
Okay, so 1
So
o'clock
that's just
is
a
the deadline for
recommendation.
the response.
So then the next week, beginning on Monday through the Wednesday of the following week is the evaluation phase. And there, what you're saying there is that during that time frame, those 10 days or so, you're going to be evaluating these ITNs.
Right.
So the evaluation team would have to be available, not on leave, not on vacation, not in Tahiti, but available and working during that time frame. So those become very critical dates to whoever you pick for your evaluation team. They have to be available. They also have to be available on the 7th. Because on the 7th is the day that the rankings are discussed or actually read. Who does that process is still yet to be determined by the procurement official. How you do it, the protocols. Often you have them read the scores and someone's documenting the reading of the scores. In other scenarios, the procurement person is reading the score to the evaluator and confirming its accuracy. And all you do is document in that meeting. And you don't have to announce who got the high score, the low score. You're doing that by having the public meeting.
Okay.
So there, people are hearing it. The next phase, which I think is the biggest problem with this timeline, is the 8th to 14th negotiation phase. Depending on the responsiveness of our applicants, that could be a lot of vendors. And determining how you are going to be shortlisting to that negotiation phase now becomes critical. Who's available during that time frame? I think, I'm not sure if we want to use the word anticipated in the schedule, but I want to caution us not to tie ourselves into something that isn't flexible. So after that 7th date, the rest of it becomes, we don't want to limit ourselves on the best value contract. So we don't want to tie ourselves down to really specific dates on this, and this. November 1, I think, is a great target. But I don't know if having those other specific dates is absolutely critical in the schedule unless we use the word anticipated or.
Can we build in that in the introduction to the timeline? Can we just say that?
Yeah, I
Subject
think
to
that might be good. Is that anticipated timeline below or something, or all dates following?
It says the table below contains anticipated timeline events for the solicitation. Dates and times are subject to change.
Yeah.
Is that good enough?
I did not see that. Is that in the opening?
Record will reflect that I corrected Walter
Bottom
the
of
first
page
time in
8.
my entire career.
Subject to change. Very good. Okay, leave it as is. Coaching over.
Excellent.
Okay.
Well done, Judge. Thank you.
Excellent. Trained legal mind.
Thank you, thank you. But thanks for pointing that out. And I think, as we work with this and as we work with our teams, ensuring that they are aware of these timelines and their availability to make sure that they are able to meet these commitments. So,
And you have a little bit of slippage in that the meeting that's scheduled for October is the 21st. So there is some time between the 14th and the 21st to expand that a little bit if we needed to.
okay, thank you very much for that. And so I think the one change we made on here was 1 p.m. on September 24th as the deadline for the proposals. They have one less hour to get that together. Okay. Let's see. I think that's everything that I had highlighted here as things that we needed to address. Any other issues, committee members, of anything that you would like to address while we have the full team or the partial team? Yes, Walter.
My only comment is about the decision to negotiate not in the sunshine.
Okay.
I think that is going to be a discussion topic that will get a lot of discussion at our council meeting. In my experience with ITNs, you have to have a significant reason not to negotiate in the sunshine. Like you're protecting a trade secret, or you're aware of some condition under which something is protected and you don't want the public to know of it in advance, whatever it is. I know this council has been everything about transparency. This would be our first commentary on all of a sudden we're going to go behind a curtain. Yes, it's going to be recorded. Yes, you can see it, but we've made the decision to go private on this. We absolutely have to have a justification to do that. We need to think through that and say what that is. And I would say that we probably need that for the meeting that we discuss it, if we're going to continue to think about negotiating outside of the sunshine.
So that needs to be mapped out before the September 24th meeting?
This is going to be presented to the ITN itself is going to be presented to the council when?
On the
When are we going to present the ITN?
August
The
19th,
19th.
2
The
weeks.
19th.
Yes.
But by then, we would need to have a clear understanding why we are not negotiating in the sunshine.
So that exemption is not just for keeping your cards close to the breast when
No,
negotiating with. the other
It's
person.
purposeful that I told Ted the story that I was aware of, but it's too long to talk about today. But it's purposeful in that in an ITN, there are often entities who are negotiating their trade secrets
So I get it.
and
So-
having the public and having the other vendor in the room.
So it's really to protect the vendor, not to protect us.
Correct.
Oh,
Correct.
all
It's
right.
more about protecting the vendor's interest than you.
Ted, does the ITN require the vendor to say if they require to negotiate in the sunshine? I can't really imagine.
No, it doesn't. I did not get a feel from the committee if it was the committee's pleasure to do it with outside of the sunshine.
It did not occur to me what the purpose of that was the purpose of doing it. I had a naive justification for it in my head. It's wrong. So
I have a request for Walter. Walter, would you be willing to prepare a statement that can be presented to the full board on the 19th, since you're still going to be here, as to why this is something that would be important that we do, so that we're able to explain it to them and get their vote or feedback on that?
So I'm a little confused by the request. I'm oppositional to it being held outside the sunshine, so I would have a hard time preparing anything that would defend that.
Okay.
I could talk about why we need to understand why it would be not held in the sunshine, but I don't want to prepare the defense document for it because I couldn't do it.
Okay.
a basic document that says when it's permissible and when it's not permissible is what would probably be helpful.
Sure.
I mean, it's because it sounds to me like
I think Fred can produce that without a problem.
there's very little chance that we're going to be doing this out of the sunshine. It sounds
I don't see the need. I've negotiated with so many people in the room and so many other vendors in the room, and I've never felt like I was handcuffed. In fact, I like the other vendor being in the room, hearing that we're pushing the other vendor equally. We're treating everybody the same. Our expectations are the same of you of anybody else. We're going to hold you to the same standard. And it does create some accountability on the team. You have to be above board. You can't be playing games. So it does require you to negotiate fairly when you're in the sunshine.
Ted, was it Fred's recommendation that we negotiate outside of the sunshine?
We have not talked about it. He included that provision in, and he will be at the meeting on the 19th
good.
to talk about the procurement policy and the ITN. So he'll be able to answer those questions.
Would he also be able to answer that question along with the question that we're asking him with regards to, what was the other question we had for him? Oh, the open presentations. So that's going to be done via email. Can he answer that question also via email?
He will be able to answer that, but as to what Mr. Sachs just said about making sure people are available,
Yeah.
We still need to have that conversation with him Monday or Tuesday, hopefully, so we can find out who's available on these dates, because it's only a month or so out.
Okay. I just want to make sure the
Yeah.
full committee has an opportunity to see his response
Absolutely.
prior to the 19th. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, thank you. Yes.
Ms. McFadden emailed me this morning, and she has a suggestion. On page 14, the bottom of the page says basically that the evaluation team will establish a competitive range of responses and then decide which one or more respondents fall into that range for negotiation purposes. Her preference, she says this is what she has seen in the past, is that instead of kind of an opening there, that in this paragraph it says something to the effect of the evaluation team will select the top 3 or 4, so that the number is embedded in the paragraph as opposed to being open for the evaluation team to determine.
Did she give a rationale as to why she wanted a specific number?
The only thing she said to me is that's the way she's always seen it. And she feels that without at least that number, the negotiation process might not be as clean or as able to move one or the other vendors or respondents.
Thoughts? Walter?
So many times you do have a minimum score requirement. So if you had 120, 200 points eligible, you might say 150 is going to, anything below that, we're not going to consider you. Anybody above 150 would just go automatically into a negotiation round. That's kind of like establishing a competitive range. The question I would have around this whole concept is, does the evaluation team decide who we negotiate with, or does the council? And is the evaluation team recommending to the council what the short list should be? And then the council decides who we move forward in negotiations? Or is it to Ted and Ted makes the decision as the interim executive director who to move forward with? I think that's an important decision.
Yeah.
And in the timeline, I don't think there's a board meeting between the evaluation and the negotiations. So that has to be decided when we're deciding this process. So the decision of the committee has to be to recommend to the council a process to follow. And it's either the evaluation team is going to make the call, the evaluation team is going to recommend to Ted, or the evaluation team is going to recommend to the council, and we're going to have another meeting to decide that on who's shortlisted.
So-
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
That's okay. My initial thoughts was that as the proposals come in, my expectation was that Ted and Holly would eliminate the ones that just technically don't meet the criteria. They can completely get rid
Yeah,
of
the
those.
evaluation team would not be given a non-responsive proposal.
Okay,
They
all right.
only will get the responsive.
Okay, so then I thought that the ones that were eligible would then go to the evaluation team, which we haven't yet decided who will be on that evaluation team. But the evaluation team would then review those and select the top tiers that they thought would be appropriate for oral presentations. That would be the responsibility of the evaluation team. They bring that forward, and then the council would then determine that after they get to hear the oral presentations, I thought the full council would hear all of the oral presentations, and then they would determine these are the ones that we like best, and then those go to the negotiations team.
So that.
That's just the way my
Except
mind.
we
That-
don't-
that
except we don't have
process
in the
is-
Timeline.
That process is not in this ITM.
So-
I love the process. It's just, that's not what's represented here.
So
Okay.
we've got a limited amount of time, and we're already
We're tight.
into November
Mhm.
before we start the contract for the needs assessment. I think the bottom line of the whole thing is what you're saying is, if we're going to do it on this timeline, unless we put in another meeting of the full council in the middle, which is
Yeah.
going to be a challenge, it's the evaluation team making,
Full decision.
it's going to send it to Ted, and Ted's going to do what the evaluation team tells him to do. Is what.
Well, and remember, when you think of an evaluation team, it's independent evaluators. They're never meeting as a team,
Right.
right? They're individually evaluating it and turning in a
And they
score.
give them a number.
That score then says there's a high score and there's a low score. And if you've got 15 applicants, there might be 3 at the top and 7 or 15 at the bottom. There's no telling what you get. That procurement official then has to make some decision with that. It's typically brought to an executive to make that decision. Here's who we're going to
Negotiate.
shortlist. And that decision to shortlist is not final. Everybody else is still in the game until a contract award is made. You can negotiate with your shortlist, be unsuccessful, and go to the next group. So everybody's still in the game, but that decision on who to shortlist is usually decided by someone who has authority in the agency to do that, not typically an evaluation team. They're making a recommendation through their scoring.
So-
Ted,
Go ahead.
no, I'm sorry. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think I was going to ask the exact same question you were. Ted, what do you think?
Right. I was going straight.
Well, I assume it would be appropriate if that ends up being me to discuss with the committee chair.
Sure, or the committee, or the evaluation committee could reconvene, or the needs assessment committee could reconvene. The scores could be presented, and the evaluation committee could decide who to move forward with in shortlisting and negotiation.
Would it make sense to leave that discretion to Ted, that if Ted thinks it's obvious who it is,
Absolutely.
he makes the call? If Ted needs guidance, he
Goes to the
convenes us?
chair.
Yeah,
Sure.
that works for me. Is that okay? All right. So Ted, we're giving you a whole lot of responsibilities here, so.
Why should today be any different?
I know. So I thank you for bringing that forward, Walter. I think it's very important for us to understand that process and kind of map out. So are we comfortable with that? Ted, do you want to repeat that back or you're good?
I'm good. It sounds like the evaluation committee or team does their thing. They're independent. They send the scores to me. I look at the scores, determine what a cutoff might be, a short list, work with you, and provide the information to the whole committee, get a little input and move forward.
Yeah, because your decision on the decision to shortlist is a public decision. So
Yeah.
those processes have to occur before that meeting where you announce who we're going to move forward with.
Okay.
And this last sentence at the bottom of 14 is really important. The negotiation team will not be bound by the evaluation team scoring. It doesn't matter if you're 1, 2, or 3. It matters if you're shortlisted. Once you're shortlisted, everybody's even. The scores are irrelevant to that.
Then we go
It's time
into
for
the,
the
then we go
Then you
into
go
the
negotiations for best.
bonus
value.
round.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. I like that a lot. Okay, so Ted, I guess my request for you and Holly, on the 19th, can we lay that out for the council so that everybody understands that process? You know, how the evaluation will happen, who will get it, when it, you know, how those decisions will be made. I think they're going to be interested in knowing. Tell us again, who's going to be responsible for laying this out and what the timeline would look like for those things. I think that's important for us to share.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Tomorrow,
Thank
Friday.
you. Tomorrow is Friday. Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So thank you very much. All right. So let's see. I have, what time is it? 4:15, guys. So any other questions specific to the ITN?
Point of clarification in terms of Liza's question
Yes.
about having 2 to 4
Oh,
specified in the ITN who will be identified. I took, I guess, from the conversation that the recommendation for shortlist would not be made in the context of a mandatory 3 or 4, but based on the cutoff point, which is established in here.
Yeah, I think you're taking out the terminology about the competitive range. And that sort of deals with her question, and that the evaluation team scoring will inform the interim executive director's decision-making as to who's a shortlist. So
Okay.
and I would not want to say 2 to 4. I would, you know, you
Just say
need to give
shortlist.
yourself flexibility. You might want to talk to 5 people. So I would leave it up to you to decide that and not the ITN to govern you.
But we should take out the competitive range.
Right, because the evaluation team is not doing that process. The evaluation team is simply scoring the ITN responses and presenting their scores.
Okay.
And then you're making the decision on who to shortlist forward with the input from the chair, whoever you decide to engage.
Okay. Thank you.
I think that deals with her comment, because that allows her to understand it isn't the evaluation team that's saying arbitrarily what the competitive range is. You're doing that.
so you have your answer to that question, to
Yes,
Liza's
ma'am.
question. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, so the next thing that I want to make sure, so we have some changes to this. I don't think they're significant, but I do think we made a few changes to this. Our next meeting is scheduled for the 19th at 12:45 to 2, which is just prior to the full council meeting. Are we comfortable with convening at that time with the feedback by, you know, once he gives us an opportunity to see these changes so that we are able to approve it and present it to the full council on the 16th, I mean, on the 19th? I don't think we need another meeting in the interim.
I am good. I think
Okay.
this, the process has been very effective so far.
Okay, good. I completely
We're
agree.
ready to go.
And do we need a full hour and a half or an hour and 45, an hour and 15 minutes for that meeting? Or can we do a 1 hour meeting? Maybe
think
a
we-
1 to 2?
I'm all for a 1 hour meeting,
Okay,
just like a 14-point type 1 page.
I completely agree. Okay, so let's do the,
Dr. Glenn?
Yes, sir.
On the meeting on the 19th, we're presenting the ITN to the council.
correct,
It's released on the 23rd, correct?
correct.
So there is very little time from that meeting to the 23rd to make any other modifications or changes. How much of that meeting agenda would be dedicated to the ITN, or would the members be getting it before the meeting to consume it and come with their comments? Meaning your meeting before that meeting is really not useful.
Yeah, so that's a valid point. It was my understanding that we would vote that we are completely comfortable with the current version of the ITN. at the meeting on the 19th. And then we turn right around and give it to the board member, to the council members to be able to say, this is it. Do we want to give it to them in advance?
Well, I think just in terms, since it'll be on the agenda, it will be needed to be posted with the meeting packet as the draft proposed ITN.
We won't have time.
I mean, to me,
I'm not sure you
the
have.
changes that we've made today are extraordinarily technical and extraordinarily limited, really. I am completely comfortable to delegate to Ted. This is it. This is my approval. We're approving
Yeah.
the substance of it unless one of us sees some mistake that Ted makes between now and then.
Or when you meet.
I would look
with
forward to
Fred, if there's something
canceling
that
the
you have to bring
meeting.
up.
I guess is my
Okay.
feeling about it.
that makes sense.
If he happens to meet with Fred and just something has to be dealt with because
So we'll
it's
leave-
something,
Then we can call another meeting.
And I may be wrong on sunshine issues and whatnot, but if it's posted as the draft proposal and at the meeting, y'all say, no, we're going to change this paragraph.
Yeah, we're not going to, we're going to have to do it another meeting.
Well, couldn't it be done at that meeting? The words are written, they're printed out. This paragraph is going to be substituted with these words. That becomes part of the proposal and
So that's why I would leave on the table the possibility of canceling the meeting. In other words, we'll leave the meeting set for the same time in the hopes that nothing like that happens.
Right.
And as long as nothing like that happens, we
don't
cancel the committee meeting.
well, it may be, since it's on people's calendars, and there's so much to do in terms of what is the process going to be? How's the process going to work? Let's look at the evaluation handbook and starting to address those issues may help to expedite things and reduce the need for additional meetings beyond what's already scheduled.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
there's still a lot to be talked about after the ITN is released. So that you could get some of those discussions started beforehand.
okay. So can we still do a 1 to 2? Are y'all opposed to that instead of a 12:45 to 2? I think that should give us ample time to review it. Y'all not agree? Okay.
Fine by me.
Okay, so 1 to 2 on the 19th, we are at TCC. And we would like to see, so how long would it take for you all to give us the next iteration of this?
What's today, Thursday? I can have it to you Monday
Monday
night.
Monday night. That's fair, that's fair. So,
And maybe earlier, it depends. I got to go. I've got a lot of scribbles on here. I'm just going to have to figure it out.
so Monday night, and will that give us time to hear from Fred? When does he come back?
Well, that's actually a perfect, I've emailed him today to ask him for times on Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday when he's got a slot. I'll circle back with him and ask him, please, Monday, if you can.
Yeah.
But frankly, we can't change. I won't have a final until after we talk with him.
Okay. So how about let's agree to a next iteration by Tuesday, if we can nail him down on Monday. And then hopefully we can incorporate, what some of the things that he says and gives this committee an opportunity to review it and provide feedback before the end of the week, if possible, by the 13th. Is that fair? Okay, and then our goal would be to have agreement with that and if possible, share it with the full council on the 16th. Is that unreasonable? So they have an opportunity to see it before the 19th, because I just don't think it's fair that we give them something on the 19th that we finalize right before and say, we want you to accept this as the final needs assessment.
When does it have to be posted for the meeting announcement? Does it have to be several days before, or can it be the day of the meeting, or?
That's a Jessica question. Oh,
The meeting notice and agenda should be posted a week in advance. The materials for the meeting can be best practice at that point, but it can be done as late as the day before.
okay.
And if the committee reviews by next Friday, then it still would be a week in advance, I
Oh,
believe.
not quite.
Yeah.
It'll be 6 days in advance as opposed to 7 days in advance.
Okay.
Okay, so we meet with Fred on the 9th, we get his responses, we have the next iteration by the 10th. The committee agrees to review and provide comments by Friday, the 13th. And then our goal is to share the attachment with the full council members on the 16th. We will not meet on the 19th. No, we will meet on the 19th to begin future work and determining what needs to happen with the evaluation team. And then we meet with the full committee on the 19th at 2:00. Does that work? Okay. I think we have a plan. I don't know what I just said, but I think I'll capture that. So I think that schedule works. Okay, awesome. All right, so that's what we plan. So the agenda for our next meeting would be what?
Approve the ITN.
Okay, approve ITN and begin moving forward with the evaluation team, planning for the evaluation team and negotiations team. And what that would look like. Anything else?
And if that includes beginning to look at processes and procedures. And it sounded like there may need to be one of those issues, if not more, that are discussed at the council meeting, the full council.
Walter may have to come back and do some training.
Yeah, I know. Trust me, when I realized he wasn't really retiring, a lot of ideas just went off in my head. Okay. So I do think we have several items for our next agenda meeting. Any member comments at this time?
Nice work.
Thank you.
Nice
We're
work.
good.
Nice work. My
Okay.
goodness.
So we
My
will
goodness.
adjourn at 4:25 PM.
Well done,
All right,
Dr.
thank you.
Dr. Glenn. Spectacular. I give you my respect.
We made some progress. Okay, Walter, thank you so very much for your engagement today. So appreciate it. We're done.
Mr. Skeen, thank you for being here. Do that yoga, man.
Yes, I
It's been great. It's been, I have to tell you, I've thought for years and years, maybe I'll do yoga. And I've never done it.
And you finally did it.
And then I finally did it, and you know
You
what?
like it.
I love it. And it's just.
Try it,
And
yeah.
people say, don't tell me about it.
You're right, that's true.
This isn't bad.
You're welcome. Take care.
Those regulations are. Well. That's good. I was there, why were they writing their grocery list?
Right, instead of. I was sort of.
I think that's part of what they. You have the right. I could say, I agree here.
Yeah, we had somebody that only part one. Pediatrician. So I was a little research.
Walter, we are gonna miss you so much. I can't stand it. I will miss you. Excellent. Excellent. Make sure he's got his earpiece.
Exactly. I have a public comment thing. I'll get up and speak 3 minutes.
See you guys. Jessica. How are you doing? When does Jessica pull the ripcord? I got some other. He may be giving you another children's services council. Everything out of this process, but I also don't want. These are good words. Oh, no, not at all. The work for you, we will not do what we are. Well, I told her. Every day, sometimes a couple times a day. You are here birthing an organization. You are here creating an organization. Well, and that's a piece of puzzle. It is a big deal to me. Big deal to me. And Neil's gonna come out here and
No, you know, I was just telling Walter, I was an evaluator for Medicaid, new Medicaid providers in Illinois. And it was like we were cutting 12 providers down to 5, plus a child welfare.
I bet that was.
And that was like 3 weeks. We were sequestered. I mean, we weren't sequestered overnight, but you know, all day we showed up at this room at 10 o'clock and left at 5 o'clock. Our notes were left in the room. And everything else. But that's people with lots of lobbyists.
Billions.
Right.
I did Medicaid managed care. I did Medicaid managed care protest.
Oh, really?
John Van Lanningham was the
Oh,
LJ
yeah.
now. He and I represented Shams, basically. We blew it up. It was our job and we did it.
That's what you did. Yeah.
Not all that proud of that, but that's what we did.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Graduation. I know how.
Right, like, so.
Well, I mean, that is important. It really is. And I mean, we had a very, and there are ways to read it. And I was sitting there thinking, I don't know if I would have done it just electronically, but I wish we had electronic then, because I would say, oh, when did they last? They said something about this 25 pages ago. How do I find it? You can just Google it.
Right.
Search it.
Well, anyway.
No, but y'all did good.
Can you believe?
Oh, it's really, it's gonna happen. And I did that thing I wrote before I got his draft. And I was really very pleased with it. And I thought really strong effort.
Professionals. All right, I'm leaving.
Good deal.
Tomorrow's Friday. See you. Be good. Bye, Judge. Thanks for that burger. I told my son, he said, heck yeah. Gotta get you there, eat some of the other stuff, there's lots of stuff there. I'm going. Go to the bar for you?
To the where?
Take care, Jessica. Yesterday, you went to the bar, maybe Ted and I'll take you to lunch and celebrate here. Absolutely. And Holly. The only thing is, if you go to lunch with